Hello, everybody. Today we are covering a game between none other Magnus Carlsen and his former longtime coach, childhood coach, Simen Agdestein, who also happens to be one of Norway's finest treasures, if we may say that. Professional, former football professional, and a top grandmaster from Norway. It must be noted that although Magnus is the number one player in the world and probably the best ever, that their head to head score is actually quite close. If we go to the database and just check here, the lifetime score between Magnus and Seaman is 8-3 with four draws. So quite close if you think about it, eh? If you include the rapid and blitz, 11-5 with seven draws, a very respectable score between the two players. So let's see how this game went then and if the Magnus effect took place on his former coach. Magnus has the black pieces here. And in this game, then Siemens starts with 1 to d4. Magnus responds with 1 knight to f6. c4, e6, standard stuff. 9 1 knight to f3. Anti-Nimzo, d5, knight c3. And we have a first surprise here, knight b to d7, the Barman variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. So yeah, very standard then moves is bishop to b4, bishop to e7, which Magnus often employs. C5 is also known, so then we would transpose into like Tarrasch setups, semi-Tarrasch defenses. Bishop to e7 as mentioned. You'd just be playing in the three knights. Knight to c6 as well, but not too common. It's more like a Chigorin setup. Obviously not 100% the same. But yeah, Magnus goes for something a bit uncommon compared to the other moves. If we go down the base, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth most popular move or continuation in the setup. So let's see how Seaman responds. We have d takes c, still very much in theory, of course. E takes d, bishop to f4, and then we have knight to b6. So it's very rare the setup that you get knight to b6. Here, the most standard move, most players who play eyes closed, is just c6. Because c6 obviously then stops. Knight to b5, and as you look here in the database, very much known theory. The top players employ this very much so. Then you'd get standard like, let's go back quickly, c6, e3, bishop to e7, and the game continues, bishop to d3 probably, and just castles. But we do not see any c6 business. We see knight to b6 business. Queen to c2 then, and knight to h5. And now on move 7, we have a completely new game. So we can see that Magnus is trying to get his former coach out of book, out of theory, as soon as possible. And it makes sense because you would think that they know each other's style very well, they know each other's game very well, and in many ways, thought process. I mean, especially from the coach to the student, a lot of nuggets of wisdom you would have imparted onto Magnus in those younger years. So Magnus goes out of book very quickly on move 7 already, and we'll see how Simon responds. Bishop to e5. Of course, Simon's got a lead in development here, you could argue. And Magnus, his knight is awkwardly placed on the rim. Obviously, it's not losing or anything if you look at evaluation as well. But here, most people would prefer white optically. You're getting e3 pushes in, bishop to d3, castling quicker. Black will also castle quick, of course, but this knight just looks very awkward. And that would most likely have to rotate back at some point in the game. So maybe you could argue that might lose a tempi. Bishop to e5 then is to delay an exchange here. Bishop to g3, knight takes g3, h takes g3. We get f6 and now bishop to g3 and now c6. Here exchanging was also fine, but Magnus wants to keep the tension a bit longer and just hold on to his center. C6 then after C6 we get E3 and now we're transposing back into a game that had occurred in 2016, but we'll soon see how it fizzles out back into a unreached position. Bishop to E6, bishop to D3 and G6. G6 quite important, develops the bishop perhaps to H6 or G7 and it perhaps drops the knight back. to g7 and some lines. Right. Also, g6 stops this idea of bishop to g6 with check. Yes, this and this check here. It would be still be fine for black, but it could be a bit awkward. So g6, a3, bishop to e7, knight to d2, perhaps rotating to try and get the push in here into the center with pawns, and we see Magnus castles. Knight to b3 then, knight to d7, so Magnus rotating the knight back. Knight to a4, Simon's arguing to take over this square here, right? The c5 square. But Magnus doesn't worry too much about that. He just trades off now. He gives up his knight for the bishop. And here, even though yes, the engine says -2 for black, -0.2 for black, most people would prefer white, just optically again. You have the H file open. Your queen and bishop are both eyeing on this diagonal. Super active. Let's say Magnus plays a slow move here, for instance, because in the game he played bishop to f7, which is correct to guard this pawn. But let's say here he goes a6. If we turn the engine on, just I promise you the move is bishop takes g6 here. Yep. Bishop takes g6. Why? Because if h takes, well, you're getting mated. Queen to g6. That's mate. You cannot go to h8. The rook is there. So, in fact, bishop to f7 is the strongest move. Not the only move, but the strongest move. You could also go f5, I believe, here if you wanted to. But bishop to f7 is to be preferred. Bishop to f7 then. We get g4, Simon taking up some more space there on the king side. a5, so Magnus is playing on the other flank of the board now, and we'll see how important this half of the board becomes when you look at the development of this game and where that really takes place. So we can now deduce and be clear that, okay, white is going to play on this side of the board. And generally, the common rule we know amongst the GMs is that, well, if you're going to play on this side of the board, I'm going to play on the other side. So let's see what Magnus does here after a5. Knight to c5, knight b to c5. So Simeon taking control of the square. Of course, b6 could come, but Magnus just decides to defend the rook, the pawn, by putting the rook on b8. We get bishop to e2, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop to e6. So Magnus gets rid of one of the knights there. Not an outpost knight, but could be one. Excuse me. Castle's long then by Siemens. So Siemens going all in on the king's side now, right? He's going to try and get his rooks over, you can imagine, just to build an attack there. Because the open file is his on the H file, right? F5 then by Magnus, just solidifying, and bishop to d3. Maybe we could see ideas of takes, and some sacrifices, maybe, you know? Who knows? Bishop to d3, queen to c7. After queen to c7, we get f4. Simon just clamping down, and you can see here 23 moves have passed, and there's nothing for black in this position. White is holding. If anything, again, if you just ask someone would they prefer here, most would probably say white, just optically again looking at the position. Strategically, maybe two, maybe g3 ideas, queen to h2. Again, you're putting up threats because white's plan after f4 is to go g5. This is the natural move because you're locking down. Those bishops don't get play, right? So if you should go g5 here, and maybe you're dreaming of ideas as mentioned, g3, queen to h2, and just putting a lot of pressure there. Obviously, it's not going to lead to a mate per se, but it can lead to some pressure. That's the thing. You need to keep on asking questions, and g5 would have been a move that asks a lot of questions. Okay, but after this f4 move, Magnus went rook a to e8, and now we get rook to h6, which is considered a bit inaccurate. The reason why is because now just the rook f7, and if now let's say you go here, let's say now you go g5, uh, black now suddenly enjoys a bit of advantage. The reason why is because you get to play d4 and open up lines for your bishop, right? And this we'll see is a very important theme because even now you could argue, right? Black's bishops are locked away. They can't do that much. This light square bishop's locked behind this pawn. This dark square bishop can't enter because of the c5 pawn. But we'll see what Magnus does, and it will show real positional understanding. We'll get to that part very soon. After rook to h6, then we get rook to f7. Let me just turn off this. and we get rook d to h1. So optically, again, now it looks good. Yeah, still you're attacking on the h file, but suddenly you're asking, what are you doing really? Because it's sufficiently defended, right? And we might see moves like g5 for black even. Let's see what happens. Bishop to f8, just kicking the rook. The rook has to drop back to h4. And now queen to e7. Queen to e7 does a few things. Queen to e7 is perhaps preparing an attack here on the e pawn. Maybe a bishop drops back, let's say. It's perhaps trying to open up lines here because there's a bishop here on this line as well. There's a rooks down here. So the position is equal at the moment, right? But if Magnus can open up the position, let's say by sacrificing a pawn, suddenly these pieces could be very dangerous. And then you now look at the position and reassess. What's white really doing? The knight is misplaced on the rim, not doing much. Black's queen and bishop look good, but the h7, g6, f5 pawn construction is locking out any potential to attack. The rook on f7 guards h7 as well as the queen. So not anything really going on. But then again, also black doesn't have much happening as well. In fact, black is still answering white here and defending. So we get the g5 move now. But compared to a few moves ago, it's not as strong because now Magnus can open up the board by sacrificing a pawn here temporarily. You would think, okay, Magnus is just giving away a pawn. But there's a reason behind this, right? If we turn on here to show, d4 is considered the best move. Why? It's opening this up, right? Because you'll take the pawn now. Yes. And now this pawn is kind of weak. There's no real defense because now after queen to d7, how are you really defending the pawn on d4? You could go, of course, queen to c3, but then I imagine just a simple rook to d8. So Simon goes g4, just blasting open the position. And here Magnus says, thank you very much. I will take the pawn. Simon captures g takes f. Magnus does the same by going g takes f. So now we see Magnus's pieces are starting to untangle itself. The bishop has space fluidity. This pawn looks a bit sensitive as well, right? Tickled there on c5. The best move here is to go king to b1, but it is a bit hard to find. It's quite an engine move. The natural move here is to go rook to d1, obviously to try and get some discoveries in. We get queen to e3 with check, and now king to b1 is forced. Not forced, but it is the best move. And now there's a bit of a problem here. Rook to d8. Yes, it is considered inaccurate because you can get this knight to b6. But, okay, the strongest move was considered here is rook to d7 just to add pressure on this bishop. But rook to d8 is fine as well. And here, white blunders with rook 4 to h1. Rook h to h1. Yeah. Yeah, the notation is quite strange there. And the reason why this is a blunder is because now Magnus just double stacks on the d file, and suddenly this bishop is overloaded if you look here. And the reason why it's overloaded is because of the following. Let's say, because now there's three pieces attacking this bishop, right? So technically it would, let's say if it had to move away, you think, okay, we are safe. If you go here, bishop to e2, it's even worse because now just a simple rook to d2, you are attacking the queen and the bishop. And you would think, okay, I can chop off one. Well, no, another one comes in and your queen can't even defend against this bishop. You can't even try c4 because, well, you just lose that. Anywhere you go now, you're losing a piece here, right? If you go queen to c1, well, you're just collecting there. You could even collect this way. Both ways are fine. So let's look at another way. You might think to defend. Rook to e1 is the engine's best move here. Well, now you just take, right? And this is actually what happens in the game if we go here. All right. Rook d to e1. And Siemens thinks this would be an equal endgame with the variation calculated. But we'll see how this rook ends up here. And let's go over it. Queen takes the bishop. Rook takes the bishop. So calculation-wise, material-wise, it's equal. But here we see what happens now. Queen takes queen with check. King takes c2. And now rook to d4. Rook to d4. There's a reason why this is -2 advantage now. It's because this knight's being hit. That's on the rim, as we discussed earlier. as well as the f4 pawn. And when this f4 pawn falls, this g5 pawn will be vulnerable too. Right. We get king to b3. Magnus captures on f4. g6. Magnus could take, of course, but if you take, it's not as juicy anymore. Takes here, and you now give white some files to work with. Obviously, it is still better. But Magnus, being the endgame maestro he is, just says, no, look here, I'm going to just move my pawn forward one square and, in fact, use your pawn perhaps as a shield even and as a target in the future that I could maybe gobble it up. h6, of course, cannot be captured because the bishop is guarding like this, cannot be captured with the rook. So after h6, we get rook to f6, perhaps trying to get rook to f7, but Magnus stops it by going rook to d3 with check. Of course, now if you move away with the king, you just lose the knight. The king is guarding the knight, so the only move here is to go knight to c3. Magnus goes a4 with check, and now Simen goes king to c2. Best move was king to a2, but both are still dire the situation, right? King to c2, Magnus drops back to d7. d7 is also again just to prevent any funny business on the 7th rank. So rook to h5, Magnus goes rook to f2, and we get king to c1, and Magnus picks up the bishop. The bishop picks up the pawn on c5, and if we look at the count now, it's 5 pawns versus 3. Simen does capture rook h takes f5. Of course, here Magnus could trade. Magnus first gives a check, bishop to e3, king to h1, trades off a pair of rooks, and after king to g7, knight takes there, and as we mentioned, that pawn becomes a target later on, and there the king gobbled it up. King takes g6, rook to f3, and after the move bishop to d4, it was in this position on move 48 that Simen Agdestein resigned the game. And the reason why it resigns here is because, well, this knight is out of the game, can't really enter anywhere. It's locked out. The rook to d3 is suggested, but you don't move the bishop, of course. Even if you move your rook to a dark square, you do not move it away here because this bishop's function, in fact, is to restrict the knight's movement totally. On top of that, the passed h pawn, and that's the deciding factor in this game. Had this pawn not been in the game, let's imagine the pawn was gone. This game could have been very different because then suddenly king to c2 ideas, king to b3, knight to c3. Perhaps then, you could make it work, but there is just no time with this pawn running, as well as the rook eventually coming in behind, as well as c5 ideas. This is the problem, right? So, yeah, on move 48, because no, rook d3 wasn't played. After Magnus played rook to d4, bishop to d4, Simen Agdestein resigned. So as we can see, this was a very close game. If we look down here at the tail, Magnus had a 97% accuracy, Simen had a 94% accuracy, only with one blunder, and that was this rook to h1, and it's so natural to make the move, right? You would think, okay, after that, you play this knight to b6, or maybe even perhaps even now here, or that's even worse because now bishop to b3 is hitting there. So it was a tricky move by Magnus. But and if you find knight to b6, it's a bit strange to understand why knight to b6 is so good. Um, yeah, let's say, I just want to play just another move here. I want to see what happens if this. Oh, it's the same story, right? Oh, and then you're in time to kick the queen away here. Yes, you give up a pawn, but there this construction comes in, where you push the g pawn earlier and you get queen to h2 ideas, right? But then again, okay, this was with a sample line just showing with king b7. But guys, let's go back to the end position here on move 48. After rook to f3, bishop to d4. And yeah, we see there that there's total domination. This pass pawn will end up winning the game. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the game and learned something from it, How Magnus sacrificed the pawn temporarily to open up lines for his bishop, his rook, and his queen all to come together. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, guys. And if you like the content, please do consider hitting that like, comment, and sub button. It will mean a lot for the channel. We are trying to build it up here. And yeah, I'll be back again very soon with another video. Take care and have a good day, guys. Bye.